Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. It is Friday, and this is another Ask Me Anything session with experienced investigators. However, this one's even more Ask Me Anything because that's all we're doing today. My name is Jeanne Walters. It's great to see you all here. And really, today is all about you. We hear from customer experience leaders from around the globe week after week. And we get some incredibly great in-depth questions thrown our way. So we have a few of those already from you, but as you join us here today, please let us know, what burning questions do you have as a customer experience leader or as someone who's just interested in customer experience? It's still within the realm of possibility that somebody says, "What is this CX thing anyway?" That's a fair question, so throw them at me. So, as always, today we have with us David Hornreich, our Director of Marketing. Hi, David. How are you?
Hello, hello. I'm well. I'm excited. We've got some great questions that have come in from the last couple of weeks from the community, and I'm excited to see what everybody brings to the table here and hear your wisdom, Jeannie.
Well, thank you. It's the wisdom of everybody. That's what's so
That's
great about the
true.
community. We can learn from one another. We can find out how other people are approaching different things, and we all benefit from it. So that's pretty exciting. So my first question, David,
Yeah.
what's the weather like in Seattle?
The weather in Seattle is predictably gray. It's actually been a really cold April,
Mhm.
to the extent that the local ski resort that normally closes like first week of April or even March is having their closing weekend this coming weekend, which is
Wow.
wild.
Yeah.
Never happened before. So
Are you gonna get some skiing in?
I'm gonna get one last day of skiing in. It's
Nice.
I see it as repayment for a very cold April.
Uh-huh.
Uh, so yeah, it all works out. I'll take that deal.
Nice, nice. Yeah, we've had
Yeah.
the typical up and down spring of the Midwest here in Chicago, so that we've had everything from, rain and sleet and snow one day to in the 80s and too sunny the next day. So we're kind of in between right now with we're supposed to get up to the 60s today, which I'm pretty excited about. So,
That's pretty good. I
yeah.
would take the 60s right now.
Yeah, so we're excited about it. So as people join us, I hope they'll tell us where they're joining us from and all that good stuff, and then after we go through a few of the questions, we can hear from everybody else. So I think we should go ahead and get started. For those of for anybody who doesn't know us and me, I'm Jeanne Walters. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Experience Investigators. And what we do is we empower CX leaders just like you to help us lead our mission and live our mission, which is to create fewer ruined days for customers. Now, we do this through helping leaders with everything from strategy to the different ways that we learn about our customers, like journey mapping and customer interviews, as well as engaging everybody in the organization to create a true customer centric culture through training and workshops and all sorts of things there. And then, of course, I do a lot of speaking and training throughout, various organizations and events and everything else. So we're just thrilled to have you here. And if you do have questions either during this process or after, there are many ways to reach out to us. So feel free to reach out to us when you have those questions because we do collect those, we gather those up, and we save them for these live sessions. So do not be shy about your questions today or at any time. You can find us in all these different places. So with that, why don't we jump in and start with one of the questions that we've received?
Yeah, so this one came in from email. It's a good one. Can you ask for too much feedback? They
Mm.
say, we've been boosting our voice of the customer program and have been adding feedback prompts almost everywhere someone has suggested it, especially on the digital side. At what point are we annoying customers?
Mhm. Well, that's a little bit of a subjective way to, to answer that because everybody has different levels of tolerance, right? But you can absolutely collect too much feedback, and it's too much feedback if you don't know how to act on it. It's really that simple. So sometimes when I talk to leaders and organizations, what we talk about is actually applying a feedback strategy to this. And what that means is really understanding what is your customer's journey and how can you enhance that journey through feedback. Meaning, if we're asking for feedback every step along the way and they're never hearing back from us, they're never seeing those changes, then that is actually disruptive in a very negative way to the customer journey. We want to be aware of that. Sometimes we act as if our feedback is happening over here and the customer experience is over here. Asking for feedback is an act of engagement. It is a part of the customer journey. So we have to acknowledge that. We have to include it in our strategy, in our understanding of how our customers are actually interacting with our brands, our products, our services, and their journey. So the first thing to think about is, are you collecting feedback that you don't know what to do with? Because if you're doing that, then you are wasting everybody's time. You're wasting the customer's time, you're wasting your team's time, you're wasting your resources. So every single thing you ask the customer, you have to be prepared to act on it, to do something about it. That means that if you find out that something isn't going well for the customer, you need to put in a plan of action to really understand, how can we move this forward so next time we ask for feedback, it's more positive about that pain point or that point of effort in the customer's journey. So the first thing is internally looking at, what are we trying to do? What can we do? Because sometimes, frankly, we have to make hard choices. We have to really understand that, you know what, at this moment in time, we can ask customers if they like this part of the journey or not. But we know we can't do anything about that for the foreseeable future. I'll give you an example. Sometimes we have to use certain legacy systems within our organization. Sometimes we don't have centralized customer data yet. Maybe that's in the roadmap, maybe that's in the plan. But if you're asking people about, something that you can't really do anything about, then it's really just a point of disruption. Now, you could be trying to make a case for investment in that part of the journey. That is doing something. So I don't want to discourage you from collecting feedback that you can eventually move on, but you have to know that that's your goal. So when you think about your feedback strategy, you can really think about, how does this layer on to our customer journey? And if we are asking for feedback every which way, and it's just dumped into a spreadsheet or a database somewhere, or maybe we report on it, but that's all we do. We pass around something that says, this is the feedback we're collecting, everybody. And everybody says, very important. Okay. But nothing gets done about it. You, as a CX leader, need to stand up and say, time out. Let's figure this out on behalf of our customers and on behalf of our organization. Because if we jump into just collecting feedback for feedback's sake, then we're missing an opportunity to really define, what does success look like? And how can we really apply customer experience as a strategy in our organization? And this is where I like to start. You all have heard me say this before. Start with your mission. Start with figuring out, what is your customer experience mission, because that will be something that guides you long term. And there you go. David's dropping links. We've got a workbook for you. You can find that at the link here, and that will guide you through, how do you develop your customer experience mission. And then you also want to define what success looks like for your organization when it comes to customer experience, because you might be collecting feedback because somebody somewhere one day said, we need to create better customer experiences. And that became, okay, that's what we're doing by collecting feedback. You have to make sure you're collecting the right feedback in the right moment and being prepared to do the right thing afterwards. And all of that ties back to, how are you defining success? And that's where we invite you to create a customer experience success statement, which is more about tying what you're doing, the efforts you are doing in customer experience, to the organizational goals of your entire organization. So what this does is, it forces us to ask those questions as we look to our feedback strategy. Will this move this strategy forward? Will this help us achieve this success the way we've defined it here in this organization? So I know I kind of went big on this question, but essentially, when we're talking about feedback, when we're talking about anything like that, we're talking about tools in the toolkit that should be driving strategy forward. We need to be more proactive. And anybody who got the newsletter that we send out, and if you haven't, please sign up for that, where I just kind of riff on things. And that one, this week, we talked about what's the real problem here. The real problem is a lot of times customer experience leaders are asked to be reactive. That's the state that they have to live in. And in order to do this well, we have to be more proactive. We have to look for how are we defining success, and then making sure that every single effort, including what feedback we collect and what we do with it, drives that success forward, delivers on that success as we've defined it, and lives that mission that we've defined as well. So I know I covered a lot of ground, so forgive me, but I think it's important to really think about where are we starting and where are we going with every single thing that people throw at us, including, make sure you ask for this feedback, push back on those requests, ask them why, ask them if it fits within this other way that you've defined success. All of those tools can really help you make the case for why you need to do this in a cohesive, centralized, and proactive way. Woo! I need some water.
Yeah. Have a sip.
Mhm.
We've got a question that came in from Christopher. Christopher, great to see you. As always, thanks for being here. This is a question that, it's 9 o'clock where I am on the West Coast, and it's rare that this early something gets me amped up or riled up, but this question did. It's based on an experience he had. I have a question based on my own experience. I just returned from a car service collection. It was pretty good. I was passed a Net Promoter Score survey card when I left with a pre-drawn circle around the 9 and 10. And the employee who served me asked, any reason not to give me a 9 or 10? What is your view on
Wow.
gaming feedback results?
Wow. Wow. Okay. So I get it. I get why you're riled up, David. Yeah, that is ridiculous. Because a couple things are probably happening there, right? When we ask the employee themselves to collect that feedback from the customer who just engaged with them, we have to consider the human nature response of that. If I and I this has happened to me where I've been in a car with a Lyft or an Uber driver, let's say, and they're not driving very safely, or they're doing things that I don't really like. I'm not going to correct them in the moment, right? Because I'm in their car. I am pretty much helpless at that moment. I am relying on them to get me to my destination safely. So maybe if it's egregious, of course I would say something, but maybe they're just doing something I'm like, "Oh, this is a little fast," or whatever. What I will do is say, "Thank you very much." And then when I get that survey, I'll leave comments. This was too fast, whatever. Because I don't want that conflict as a person. It puts me as the customer in a very awkward and sometimes even dangerous position. So the whole act of having the customer and the person who's providing that service interact in that way puts a spotlight on how you can get very skewed results this way. So that's one thing. And I actually see this in B2B a lot, actually, because in business to business, sometimes what we do is we say, hey, customer success manager or account manager, once a year, we want you to call your customers and say, would you recommend us, and get that NPS result. Well, again, you're in this situation where Joe customer, who might be shopping around, might be feeling like, oh, this isn't great. They might really like you as a person. And so if that customer success manager is asking them, they don't want to hurt their feelings. So we get these skewed results that tell us that we're doing really well as an organization. And then we all throw up our hands and say, I can't believe how our retention rate dropped and how these customers aren't renewing and how we're getting these bad reviews. I don't understand. So that's happening. The other thing that's happening is inside the organization, something's going on where people are being rewarded or punished based on their individual results. Now, I am not saying that there is a universal way to do this, because I think there's a lot of validity in rewarding great results from NPS or whatever you collect. I think that as an organization, that can be very empowering and help people focus in the right way. What I would like to see is having real-time feedback, not, delivered by, or not collected by the actual service provider, and then use that for coaching for real-time feedback to the employee. Because what we've seen in a lot of different ways, and this is backed up by data, is that if you coach people in real time, you'll actually start seeing those scores improve because they start recognizing, okay, this is specifically what I need to change. What tends to happen is we collect this feedback, and then we go up to the employee after a month or 3 months or 6 months. I mean, I've seen it all over the place. And then we say, "Hey, you really got to bring this score up. Good luck with that." And we really don't give them any guidance, any, notes on this is how you need to adjust a little bit, or were you aware that when you say this, the customer hears this? We If we use the feedback, the individual feedback in the right way in real-time coaching, people are very receptive to that. They can make adjustments and changes. And then we can show them also in real time, hey, you had a really similar thing happen here. You handled it differently, and this is the result of the feedback. So that type of motivation and momentum can actually build over time as well. But that's a huge problem. If somebody's circling that, that is ridiculous. I mean, we've all been in those situations where they already asked that horrible question of, if you are not going to give me a 9 and 10, basically tell me now. And that's because there's something that is askew or in, like, not in balance about how people are being rewarded or coached, really. I do not think people should be punished unless, if they're doing something horrible, of course. But if it's because they had a little blip in the NPS and something happened, that's a coaching opportunity. That's not something that we should look at and say, okay, well, you're not, we're taking away your bonus or something. We have to really look at overall, how can we reward people who are absolutely imperative to getting these customer feedback scores. So the people who are delivering that service, we need to make sure we're rewarding them when things go up. But we also want to be really careful about how we use that negative feedback, because otherwise, of course, they're going to game the system, right? If they are punished based on something that they feel like, they don't even know what's the difference, right? They could get a 9 on one and a 5 on the other. And maybe they feel like they did everything the same way and they have no idea what to change and they feel very out of control. We want to make sure people feel empowered by feedback and not afraid of it. And if they're gaming the system like that, they are afraid of it. So I love this question, Christopher. And I'm really curious how you handled it. You're probably braver than I am. You maybe like tore it up in front of them or something. I don't know. But tell us tell us how you handled that, because I'm very curious.
Oh, I really hope you tore it up in front of them. That would be
I
great.
know, right?
Jeannie, I remember this is years ago, but you had written an article for the Experienced Investigators blog called "Bad Feedback is the Best Feedback." And it was
Mhm.
all about how those hard truths are what
Yep.
can be catalysts for change and improvement. And it just feels like doing this is undermining the whole reason to do it at all.
It absolutely is. And I think that's the thing that, and I've shared this story before too, but like there was a client of ours that they were getting hit with some bad feedback because there was a huge problem. There was a problem with something in what they released, and then there was a problem in the fact that customers didn't have a way to really get the support they needed. And so instead of kind of dealing with that in the moment, they just outright changed how they actually tracked feedback, the scores, everything, because they wanted to report back to the executive team, "Oh, we've got this totally under control," and everything else. And it was such a culture of like fear. And what we really started working with them on was this idea of, you know what, we have to treat customer experience differently within the organization. And we have to get everybody to understand that when we get these lessons, that's what they are. I mean, bad feedback. And, whenever we do journey mapping or anything else, I always say it's really easy to get seduced into thinking about your best customer on their best day. And whenever I ask leaders, tell me about your customers, I mean, 9 times out of 10, they go, our customers love us, because they're thinking of the customers that love them. But if you can actually transition that and think about your worst customer on their worst day, you'll actually get much better results, because that will shine a light on the things that maybe are irritating to some of those customers who love you, but maybe they're not going to tell you in feedback. By adjusting, by making those changes for the positive, you're not just helping those hard customers, you're helping the ones who are really, with you, that are loyal, and they're going to see that and think, "Oh, wow, look at that. They're innovating, they're improving the experience." So, it's so beneficial to get that bad feedback. Just like in any other part of our life, sometimes it's hard to hear, but we need it, right? Like if you are surrounding yourself with people who just tell you you're great all the time, well, first of all, get a toddler in your life because they will tell you the truth. But then you want people who say, "You know what? I wish you would have handled that differently," because then next time you will. And that's what we want for customers as well. We want them to feel empowered with the feedback that they give us, and we want our employees to feel empowered and know that, you know what, this is all a learning. We are all works in progress, and things change, like the market changes or the journey changes or all these things change that we can't control. But when those changes happen, we might need to adjust, and that could take time and that could take learning. So I think it's all about that culture within the organization that really drives so many of these conversations about negative feedback and gaming systems.
I love it. Yeah, I feel like just that one example could lead us down so many different talking
Mhm.
points and roads.
It's
Um,
true.
we had a couple questions come in related to putting together a cross-functional team. The first one's from Roberta, and she asks, "What are your top three?" I like the phrasing of this. "What are your
Yeah.
top three must-haves when building
Mm.
a CX team?"
Okay. Great question. So, yeah, customer experience is something we can't do alone. We need cross functional leadership. And in order to get there, we need to do a few things. We need to, first of all, get buy in from all of those leaders. And so that's an ongoing thing. And one of the things that we just released an article that it's linked in our newsletter about your first 90 days as a CX leader. And in that, one of the things that I talk about is you have to build those coalitions from day one. You have to reach out and start really understanding, what do these leaders care about and how can you get them involved? So, one is kind of, the first thing is buy in, and that takes some time. And you're not going to get there overnight. You're going to have to build that over time. And there will be some people who don't join you right away. And you have to kind of accept that and look for the people who are going to help and support you. So, that's one. The other thing is, know what you're doing. And that sounds so silly, but that's why we have something called a CX charter that we use. And that is really defining, what is this team doing? How are we delivering on our CX mission? How are we delivering on our CX success statement? How have we defined all those things? Because that will help everybody stay on the same page. But the other part of that charter, which isn't as, like, I don't know, glamorous, is that charter also defines, how often are we meeting? Who's here? What are our roles and responsibilities? All of those things. Because otherwise, what tends to happen is you get people together, they're very enthusiastic in the beginning, and then you start with this priority list, right? You get all this feedback. Maybe you've done journey mapping. Maybe your VP of what's its is impassioned about something, and it becomes this laundry list of, this is everything the CX team has to do. And people start disengaging and they start saying, "I'm not going to go to that meeting. It doesn't really matter if I'm there. I also, we can't do it all and we don't make progress." And it can be kind of demoralizing. And so the CX charter helps you stay engaged in the right way with the right decision making. Because otherwise, what tends to happen is you have the director of IT saying, "You know what, we can't do X, Y, and Z because that's not part of our tech roadmap. So just cross those off." And then you've got the director of marketing saying, "Well, we've got this big event coming up and we need customers to do this. So we need to prioritize that one." And you've got all these different priorities based on inside the organization. And the role of the CX team, the role of the cross functional team, is to really advocate for the customer and align what you're doing with successful outcomes for the business. And so that means if you can stay aligned on that, then it makes it much easier to say, "Hey, IT leader, I hear what you're saying. We need to do, we maybe we can't do XYZ. What can we do? And how can we prioritize the next step?" on behalf of our customers, because we know that this priority will actually drive our success throughout the organization. We know that if we do this for customers, they're going to be happier with us. They're going to convert more. They're going to whatever. So we want to constantly look for those connections and pull that thread for the other leaders involved. So I would say a CX charter is the second thing, and that includes defining roles and responsibilities, everything else. And then the last one is a little different, but I really think socializing what we do is super important. That's part of not just getting buy in from the people in the room, but leaders throughout your organization. And what I mean by that is we want to communicate our successes. We want to make sure that everybody in the organization understands that when we say we're investing in customer experience, we're getting great returns, right? Like we are, even if it's slow going, you can usually find those quick wins. Sometimes it's very reactionary in some ways where it's our reviews got better, right? Like if we're tracking user reviews for software or something and they're terrible, and then we start investing in these priorities, the CX team is coming together to take action on feedback to make sure we're choosing the right things based on these priorities. And we start seeing, you know what, reviews are mentioning that this thing is fixed, or they're not mentioning the problem anymore because we solved it. You want to look for those types of things and share that throughout the organization. Because if you have, and I like having an internal communications person on the team who can really help you with that strategy and with rolling those things out. The other person I would love to see on that team that sometimes we don't talk about is a learning and development person, because if they can help you make sure that you're training the right way, make sure that if they hear about things where they're like, that's not how it's supposed to be done, how can we educate more throughout the organization? So having those two people who are part of the team can be very helpful as well. So I would say really it's about kind of, that CX charter to drive everything, but then also don't forget that part of your job is to communicate and socialize these ideas too. And in fact, when we talk about customer experience goals, we call them SMIRC goals. And the first S there is for social, because we want to make sure that we are really doing things on behalf of the whole organization and not just saying CX is important without really giving other people the context of why it's important and show them what winning really looks like. So good luck. That's a great question. And Roberta, I've known for so long, so it's great that she participated this way. Oh, you're muted. There it is. Bingo.
Oh, I almost made it through the whole thing. Jessica asked where she could find that resource for the first 90 days. So I did put a link to that in the LinkedIn chat and in the YouTube
Great.
chat. And then I also tried to boil down your responses into a top 3, Jeannie. I didn't do it justice, but
No, that's good. That's good.
I mean, your answer was a lot more nuanced, but I think that's a nice overview. We also have an update from Christopher.
Oh,
The moment we've been waiting for.
yes.
Christopher says, I wanted to say you would have until this moment. This is what I would have said too, Christopher.
Yep.
But to your point about being human, I actually just smiled and walked away. I have
Mhm.
sent a note to the head of after sales, not mentioning names, suggesting they may wish to look into this.
Love that.
Yeah.
Well,
Because it's
well
probably
played,
not that
Christopher.
person who's just circling things. It's probably really common across
Yep.
the office, at least.
And usually I've had a lot of organizations tell me like, "Oh, it's the one guy or it's the one time." And I actually have done a lot of, ride-alongs and observational work and everything else. And one of the things that I really believe is that usually that's learned behavior. So if you're seeing a workaround from one person, that's because they learned it from somebody else who said, this is not worth it. This is not, we it's better if you just do this. It works better for all of us. Be a team player, all of that. When I was in college one summer, I had a data entry job. I've shared about this job before, but I was miserable because I was actually pretty fast as a typist. So they would give me a stack of things and I would do my data entry and then I go to my boss and say, "Okay, I'm done." And she always was like, "Oh, okay, great. Here's another pile." And about my 3rd or 4th day, the group that worked there full time came up and kind of surrounded my cubicle and said, "We would really appreciate it if you slowed down because you're making it harder on the rest of us." And so I literally had this moment where I was like, "Okay, I think I better do this," because it was everybody against me, right? And it's such a great example though of I learned to be worse at my job because of the culture there. And so if we don't address the cultural issues of this, people will have workarounds or slowdowns or any of these things simply because they don't trust the culture, and somehow the culture is not supporting good work, essentially. And so that's what we really want to look at when we see these workarounds or the ways that employees have gamified things. You can pretty much trust that it's not just the one employee. And you also have to ask, why do they need this workaround? What are they afraid of? How can we address it? All of those things. So I slowed down for about 2 days and then I couldn't help it. And yeah, I was just not very popular that summer, but I did a good job, just so you know.
We're all very proud of you, Jeanne.
Thank you. I ate lunch alone a lot. I will say that.
We have another question that's related to building a cross-functional team as well. So I definitely want to get to that. So this person writes, "We've put together a cross-functional team. Hooray. The problem is it's an impossible to find a time when everyone is free to meet. So it's just not happening. What's the solution here? Should we make our cross-functional team smaller? Should we replace people who are too busy with someone else from the same department, even if they're not an ideal fit? Or is there some other magical solution that you can?
Yeah, I wish there was a magical solution here. Scheduling can be the hardest thing that we do sometimes because not just for this, but for everything. I mean, David knows that when we schedule workshop series, sometimes they say, "How long will it take?" And I'm like, "Well, it depends on when can we get everybody in the room." And so I think when we talk about the CX team, we have to be based in reality, right? And so I like to have kind of a core group, and then the CX charter and what that does actually helps everybody agree and say, yes, we will meet on this day, this time. If I can't be here, I will do X, Y, and Z. And sometimes that does mean I'm going to send somebody from my department who can at least be a spokesperson for us. Sometimes it means we're going to record this, if you're doing it virtually, and make sure everybody gets that recording and then acts on that recording by a certain date. You do have to put some guardrails on this because otherwise, like I said, it can get kind of disheartening because people don't see that progress. So that's a big, big part of it. The other thing is, I like to actually switch around who's leading the meeting because instead of just saying this is customer experience driven, you're saying everybody here is really important and the work we do is really important. Sometimes we like to start with mission moments, which is where you say, how did we live up to the customer experience mission? Who has a great example of that in story? Or how did we not? And how can we learn from that? There's something really powerful about connecting to that mission time and again in very real ways. So it's not just words that can help, people stay connected with why this is so important. And then the other thing is, this is a real meeting. I've seen this sometimes treated like, oh, it's volunteer, whoever can show up, whatever. So in some cases, we are asking people to kind of add this to their list of to-dos. And I don't like that, but it happens. And so we have to acknowledge that too. Sometimes we can shift too and say, you know what? If we're focused on this priority for the next 3 months, that means we need this group, this group, this group, but they only need to be here for that 3 months. So you can invite people in a temporary way who can drive things forward. And again, the beauty of the charter is that that gives everybody the same starting point. So if you've all agreed to the charter and everybody understands this is the goal of this and what we're doing and our commitments, if somebody comes in temporarily, you can share that with them and say this is who we are and what we're trying to do, and they get into the fold a lot faster that way. So sometimes you do have to be dynamic, you have to be flexible and agile and all those things, but I would say make sure that whoever is on the CX part of this CX team, there's a core group of people who are driving this forward. Sometimes that means reaching out after a meeting and having those hard conversations with other leaders and saying, hey, you weren't there today. the priority we're working on, we really need you there. We really need you there. And so if you can't be there, this is what I'd like you to do. I'm going to share with you the questions we had. Can you please get back to me by this date? Essentially, it's about being professionals. And sometimes in CX, we relegate CX to this world of, hey, whoever wants to join us. And that's not how you make progress. And so by leading this in a way where you're saying, this is for the organization, this is not nice to have, this is part of our strategy, then you start getting that buy-in from other leaders. And if you understand their motivation, which you figured out, by the way, in that success statement that we talked about, you figured out that, you know what, your CFO needs to hear about this, your chief marketing customer or officer has to hear about this. You understand what motivates them personally in that role, then that can really help you too. And say, the reason we're doing this and the reason we need you involved is because we're going to help your goals. We're going to move your outcomes faster and make sure you get there in a successful way. You have to tie that all together to keep that buy-in and to keep things really motivated and moving forward. So those are a few strategies and tactics, but I really encourage you to look at that CX Charter workbook because that walks through some of this as well.
And I'll get that link back up in a moment. But first, one more question that came in from the community in the last couple of weeks. And then anybody who's watching live, if you've got a question, we've still got time for you. Get it in, and we'll do our best to get to it. But let's get to our last question from email this week. This is an anonymous question. They ask, I've heard you talk a lot about closing the loop with customers. Whose responsibility is it to close the loop? And who's responsible for determining best practices for closing the loop appropriately?
Oh boy, that's a big, huge question, isn't it? So when we talk about closing the loop, first of all, let's define what that actually means. So because sometimes we throw around these terms, and I think in some organizations they mean different things, but essentially closing the loop means if you tell me something as a customer, if you complain, if you have a question, if you're waiting on something or need something or have just shared great feedback, we need to make sure that we help you feel heard. And we make sure that if we do take action, we want you to know about the action that we're taking. The way this shows up very commonly, especially in B2B, is something that you'll probably all relate to. And that's I'll get back to you, and then never hearing from somebody again. That is a perfect example of not closing the loop. When we make a promise to the customer and we don't actually follow up with that, that's leaving that loop open. The other thing that happens is when we are working on improvements in our organization, there can be what some organizations, and depending on the method that you use, some of them call inner loop and outer loop, and there's all sorts of stuff around that. But essentially what we're saying is, we also need to acknowledge employees throughout this process internally. We need to make sure that we are closing the loop everywhere we can so that there aren't all these like random things popping up and nobody's addressing them. So that is kind of the definition of this general term of closing the loop. And when it comes to responsibility, part of that is a cultural thing. Like we have to own it. At our organization, we have as part of our values, that we are owners. We own the thing we're working on. And that's because we want people to feel empowered about really making sure that if I get that from you, or if I hear that, if I make that promise to you customers, that has to be on me. I have to figure out how to close the loop. Now, does that mean I have to actually be responsible for the actions of closing that loop? Not necessarily. I'm not a programmer, right? And let's say there's something that has to be programmed. Well, I'm not the person to do that, but I'm still the person who's responsible to going back to that customer and saying, hey, you know what? This is what's going on. This is what you can expect, whatever. And sometimes that does mean passing things off, that responsibility off to that, let's say the programmer is the one who has to interact because of, speaking the same technical language or something. We say to that person, okay, it's your job to close the loop with the customer. And then they know that that is super important and that's something that they're accountable for. So some of this is kind of a cultural thing that we need to address in our organizations. The other part of this is something that's trackable. And so if we are having a lot of problems with closing the loop with customers, This is where you get into things like, are they calling back about the same issue to the contact center? Are they sending in complaints saying, I've already told somebody about this and I didn't hear back? There are ways to track this, and that can be a really good thing to track because that's more behavioral. So that's not just what customers are sharing that they think, it's about something that's happening that we know we have to address inside the organization. I will tell you what, in every single B2B organization, responsiveness is an issue. And I can say that confidently because I've literally seen it at every B2B organization that I work with. Responsiveness is an issue. And that's because we make a promise to the customer. The customer hears one thing, we think we're promising something else, and it's immediate disappointment. And usually it's around wording. It's around, I will get back to you soon. What does soon mean? Does that mean 48 hours? Does that mean 20 minutes? Does that mean 2 weeks? We have to get better at defining those types of expectations for customers because otherwise we are immediately not closing the loop. We are immediately breaking that promise. So there are all sorts of ways to look at this, but I think that's a big part of it. And this is also where coalition building and having that cross-functional support is so important because there are times we just can't do it. We don't, we're not responsible for that team. We don't have access to the data, all sorts of different reasons why we can't actually close that specific thing with the customer. So we want to look at, okay, how can we move this forward and get accountability around it without necessarily the responsibility of it? And that can be a little tricky, but if you have all of those tools, that can help you all be on the same page about why this is so important. And if you're tracking things like responsiveness, then you'll be able to make the case of, hey, this is important. This helps drive our retention rates. This helps drive our referrals, all of those things. So again, connecting those dots, but at the same time, looking at sometimes we can't be responsible for the actual work, but we still have to be accountable to the customer in closing that loop. So that can, that's something I hope you take on as like, we're going to own this throughout our organization. And that's something that can help everybody work better. And the customer will feel heard as well, which is a huge thing. They will give up refunds. They will give up all sorts of things if they feel heard. And that's true for all of us, I think. We just want to be heard, and that's how we should think of closing the loop. How can we help the customer feel heard in the right moment so that, they're going to go away, even if we can't solve their problem, they're going to go away feeling heard and understand that, we're being honest and transparent and getting back to them when we said, and all of those things.
One of the things that really resonated with me there was you talking about setting expectations around timing and things. And I wish that I had the slide that we use so often, the equation of customer experience, where customer experience equals perception minus expectation. So much of when people are disappointed, it's not even that the experience was terrible. It's just that they expected more because oftentimes we set them up to expect more.
That's right.
Our sales team or whoever was making the promise wanted to go big. So
and it's all multiplied by emotion, which makes it so tricky.
That's right.
But that's what's fun about it too.
Yeah. Well, that's going to do it for our questions this week. I want to thank everybody for joining us, everybody for contributing with their questions and ideas. And let's get up ways that people can send you their questions when they think of them in the middle of the night.
That's right. That's right. We will accept them at all hours. First of all, thank you everybody for these fantastic questions and for being here and just for being part of this community. We all learn from each other in this field. And I think that there's no one perfect way to do things. And so by really listening to one another, we're all sharpening the saw and making sure that we are evolving as leaders. And I find that really exciting. So thank you for that. And if you do have questions, please reach out. We have many ways that you can find us: LinkedIn, Twitter, all sorts of different things. If you haven't yet signed up for our Year of CX resources, please go ahead and do that at yearofcx.com. That's where you'll find all of those guides and workbooks that we just spoke of, as well as many, many others. And then we, of course, would love for you to join us at Experienced Investigators and sign up for our newsletter. We also have a newsletter on LinkedIn. So there are lots of different ways to connect with our content. And of course, we love hearing from you because that helps drive the content that we produce. So if there are questions that you say, I wish you would do a guide about this, or I wish there was a workbook about this, let us know. That's the type of thing that we are always working on for you. So, as always, thank you so much for joining us here. It is our mission to create fewer ruined days for customers. And by being here with us, by asking these questions, by learning with us, you are helping us live that mission. So, thank you so much, and we will see you again soon.